It's House of Strauss, everybody. We are joined by Andrew Sharp. He looks disappointed because usually when I talk to him, I try to imitate his famed intro for his podcast.
Come on, hit me with the hello. I love the Ethan hellos.
Hello, and welcome to House of Strauss. We are joined by Andrew Sharp of so many good podcasts as I try to adjust my levels.
Yep.
Oh, it's too many. You are more, as I say, you are more podcast than man. I consider you to be just the best right-hand man. I am so impressed with how you do what you do. And it's because you are a takesman by heart, Andrew. You've got takes. You are very opinionated. And you're great in a setting, like on the GOAT podcast, where you are a co-host. But when you're in more of a supplemental role, for instance, when you are podcasting with the great technologist, Ben Thompson, you're really good as a setup man. And I don't think that's easy to do. I still struggle with it.
Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, sometimes you have to know when to just sit back and let Ben Thompson cook. And we've had a lot of fun the last 2 years sort of building out the podcast brand. And this will be the 7th podcast that's released from me this week. So when I say too many podcasts, I was on with Spike Eskin and Rights to Ricky Sanchez last night. And then we have Sharp Tech, Sharp China, and Greatest of All Talk, which people can access by subscribing to Stratechery. As a bonus, you get lots of great writing from Ben Thompson, but you should really be subscribing for the Sharp brand. So check us out.
I don't want to hear any excuses about too many podcasts. I don't want you to be the podcasting Joel Embiid right here.
Well, exactly. I'm not going to be. I've already asked you to push the podcast back an hour, so I'm already a little bit Embiid. But I'm happy to be here because I don't really know what direction this is going to go. You mentioned Netflix and the Jake Paul fight. You mentioned some NBA topics. But what's fun about this one is, you know, we just sort of see where the takes take us, and I'm excited.
Yeah, that's also this strange balance I've been trying to strike. I used to over prepare and try to just listen to everything somebody I was interviewing did. And I've realized that there is a balance that you can overdo it sometimes, over the term in the podcast versus have a conversation. There's an ineffable chemistry to the whole thing. I don't know where this is going either, Andrew. I have no idea. That's what makes it exciting. It's going to be straight up more election analysis. That's what we've been doing a lot of here.
Let's dive into the crosstabs. Never too late to dive into the crosstabs. I'm ready.
How red-pilled are Latino men, Andrew? Go.
I have no takes on what happened in Queens, but I'm glad that lots of other people do.
Yes. I like the crosstabs. I like going through it. Well, I think for those who do not know, Andrew is a little bit like me in that you've got a foot in NBA media, having been in there, and then you've just got a foot in all these other parts of the media where you're podcasting in China, as obviously as anybody could predict. So we're not so different, you and I, is what I would say. And absolutely. I think that it makes it so that you're almost unusually positioned to comment on some of these things. If we were, for instance, talking about sports journalists affecting the blue sky, as I just wrote about, I don't think that you would go, I don't want to offend people. They'll never let me back at, I don't know. Do institutions even exist that do media? I have no idea.
Part of the issue these days. Yeah, absolutely.
That is part of the issue these days. Okay, well, here's something for you off the bat. Didn't think I would start it here, but there's this defection to Blue Sky. As I wrote about Howard Beck, his interview about it with Richard Deitch, I was all braced for it to be very ideologically rooted. And it surprised me in being a broader critique of Twitter X. And it contained some things that I had said about how it's bad for journalists because they suppress your links. Elon, his incentive is for the whole conversation to be happening on the platform. If you're a journalist and you want to get paid for your work, you want to be able to have that hyperlink shoot out to what you're doing and have that be part of the conversation. And what I'm wondering is this: What's your take on that? Do you think Elon is right to do that? Is my aversion to this all selfishly rooted because I want people to look at my stuff versus having to dance for Elon on old Twitter X?
It's a good question. My take is that selfishly, I miss the era of Twitter that didn't suppress links because as a user, I discovered a lot of good writing in like 2014 or 2015 era Twitter. That Twitter has been gone and dead for quite some time. It was dead before Elon took over. And to the extent we're talking about Twitter and the interplay with journalism, you know, I glanced at your piece. I didn't get a chance to read the full take from you, but I saw that Howard Beck was talking about recreating 2012 Twitter over at BlueSky. And I mean, I think there are two big problems with that. The single biggest problem with BlueSky trying to recreate Twitter in 2012 is that the internet just had fewer people on it in 2012 and everyone was in a much better mood. And so that's obstacle number one. And then from a business standpoint, like Twitter was never really a traffic driver, but in 2012, 2013, it was incredibly valuable as a networking tool for media. And I mean, in a lot of ways, I owe my entire career to Twitter. It's how I was discovered at Grantland. It's how I was then discovered at Sports Illustrated. And I made all sorts of connections, sharing writing that other people thought was good and just sort of growing in my career that way. The one issue, though, is that like most of those jobs online don't really exist anymore. And so I don't know who you're networking with on Twitter or where you're trying to get at this point. Like you should be pissed off because Twitter specifically would be useful to your business. But most of the rest of the media, like I actually think there would be a point of diminishing returns even if links weren't being suppressed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I have a weird ambivalence to it where I do feel, as you say I should, selfishly pissed off. But then I also remember that before Musk bought Twitter, it was just absolute hysteria, full tilt, informed at the absolute peak by the pandemic conditions. But I don't know if that was societally healthy. So if I'm being fully honest, and I know this is a take that a lot of you're not supposed to say in sports journalism, I actually think things are better for society since Elon took it over. I just remember that things would just shut down, that we would have to there'd be something in the news, a discrete incident somewhere, and we wouldn't go to work that day. There was a level of hysteria that was not productive or good for society. I understand arguments that it's too much the other way. I get it. That's just my experience. But it's also just so that the suppression of links, which was happening before Elon, but it seems to have accelerated after he took over. It's less of a product that's useful for me and less of a product that's useful for me as a consumer. I miss being able to be directed to something out there and go, oh, that was a cool article to visit. Now it's just, well, this guy's got good takes. Oh, she's got good takes. I like the takes. That's a smaller world to me. And I realize what you're saying, that it's a smaller world in general anyway. So even if the conditions were restored, we wouldn't exactly be going to all these cool articles in Vanity Fair. We can't recapture the past.
Yeah, well, and the other thing is, as much as Twitter helped young journalists like you and I in 2010, 2011, 2012, it wound up, I think, really hurting journalists toward the end of the decade, where there was a groupthink that emerged and a lot of people just sort of fell in line with various talking points, even in sports media. Like everybody seemed to have the same opinion. So if you were 23, 24, 25 years old, it was harder to stand out and think creatively because everybody had to worry about getting yelled at on Twitter or people thinking you're dumb. And so I would say, it seemed like overnight, all these writers became commodified and there weren't many people who were doing anything that was actually interesting. And it was a byproduct of the ecosystem that had emerged around Twitter and just sort of the reflexive response to that environment. And, to the extent that Elon's changing that, or that Twitter is just going to become less central to journalism, I think that's going to be a net positive in the long run. Now, if everybody goes to BlueSky and tries to recreate that bubble environment at BlueSky, then it's L's across the board for people. But I don't really think that BlueSky is going to take off in that same way.
I think you made a good observation about how they just learn these reflexive ways to shut themselves off. And it was odd. You were watching people adopt lingo that was specifically tailored to allow them not to interface with points. And you would just language was just thrown at you. Like, are you doing a both sidesism? No, I'm just saying that there's gaslighting. It's just, I can't communicate.
Yeah. Well, look, my world was sports media. So that's sort of the lens I'm looking at. But you can obviously sort of broaden the aperture and say that all of the most important debates that society had was falling into those patterns where there was acceptable viewpoints and there wasn't really much room for dissent. And so, yeah, I think Twitter is in a much healthier place today. But you can even just look at like NBA awards voting where like everybody would sort of settle on one candidate and that person would get like 97 out of 100 votes. And then the three people who didn't choose the right candidate would get roasted on Twitter. Like it just got to be this really unhealthy dynamic for everybody.
I'm so angry at Gary Washburn. It's just ridiculous. Who does he think he is?
Good poll. Yeah. I think he voted for Carmelo in like 2014 and was one of the first people who realized that, Twitter's not so fun anymore. It's okay to disagree about NBA awards. Who the fuck cares?
I totally disagree, passionately disagree with his selection of Carmelo Anthony, but I will defend to the death his right to vote for Carmelo Anthony.
That's right.
Yeah. It was conformity factory for a variety of reasons, and I do not eulogize it. I do eulogize that period beforehand. I liked when we were so naive as to not think that we could be sent up in that way and not think that it would be permanent. There was a time, kids, when everybody just talked on Twitter as though they were talking to their friends in a group chat.
You could say something stupid and people wouldn't hold it against you for the rest of your career. And then somewhere along the line that changed and it became more fun to talk to your friends on text messages and in group chats. And, that's a healthy dynamic too.
At least I think it is. I don't know what other people's group chats are. When I see people, because I think some people that we work with, some people that we were friends with would be horrified that we go, yeah, I kind of like the Twitter change, because you'll hear them say, there's so many Nazis. He's got to do something about the Nazis. Why does Musk allow the Nazis? And I go, I don't know if these people are actually describing Nazis that they see on the platform that I do not see, or they just regard people with other opinions as Nazis. I don't know.
It's a
because
really
I can't
good
see
question.
what they see.
I personally do not encounter very many Nazis on Musk era Twitter. I do encounter more Republican viewpoints and more evidence that supports Republican perspectives. And is that being thrown into the Nazi bucket is, I would say, an open question. I think it probably varies by who you're talking to. But yeah, look, the internet itself is a mess and full of bad people. Wherever you look, maybe that's not happening on BlueSky. I don't know. I haven't really checked it out yet. But that just sort of comes with the territory as far as I'm concerned. And I have developed pretty effective antibodies to depressing, inhumane shit that I see on the internet. So I guess maybe I'm not as sensitive as some other people.
Why are you selling BlueSky? I just looked today, over 20 million subscribers, they say. There's a subscriber counter, and it just grows and grows and grows like that debt clock. Why are you selling?
Do I need to get andrewsharp.bluesky? And don't they remove the vowels from the BlueSky address? I can't imagine, as someone who's grown up in the Twitter ecosystem, and I don't tweet anymore because it's just like not a productive use of my time. And like I said, there are too many people on Twitter. So if I tweet something that's remotely interesting or counterintuitive or deviates from the sort of agreed upon talking points, then I have all sorts of people sort of bickering in my mentions, and it gets in my head, and I'm like, should I respond to them and refute the argument? And then I'm just sort of arguing with strangers. It's just like an unproductive cycle for me. So I don't really tweet. I just retweet podcasts. But having that experience, I can't imagine wanting to go recreate some alternate Twitter ecosystem on a different platform. Like, I have real friends that I can talk to about current events, and I don't need a bunch of strangers. And I don't think it would be useful for my career anymore. I mean, that's the other thing. It's like, what are these people getting out of tweeting into the ether at BlueSky and having a bunch of people agree with them? Like, it's not driving traffic. So what's the point, really?
Yeah, I don't know many people in my life who come to me and go, I just wish there was another Twitter so I could tweet even more. That's what's really missing when it comes. That's really the gap between me and my fulfillment. That's the bridge that I need. And maybe some people do need that. Like, I have friends that I can broadcast my half-assed takes to, like poorly conceived takes, just throwing it out there. It's healthier for me to send those as text messages than broadcast them to a bunch of strangers on BlueSky. Yeah, I've come to love the group chat for a variety of reasons and extol its virtues continuously. This theme, though, of the inability to recapture what was, I see it. I see it in your podcasting. I know I say that I'm not doing as much research, but I heard you striking these exact notes in your podcast with Ben Thompson when discussing the Mike Tyson Netflix fight. That's, in a way, a business story about Netflix sports, their technical difficulties, and we can get into all of that and whether Netflix sports is the future. But that was also an interesting cultural story about a society trying to come back to where you cannot return to, and then simultaneously, concurrently going, oh yeah, we really can't go back now, can we? This is terrible. Why did we do this?
Did you watch the fight? I couldn't bring myself to watch the fight because I knew 60-year-old Mike Tyson was going to be really depressing to watch. I'm happy that he got $20 million out of it. Apparently he got paid $20 million. That's great. But I just couldn't get into it. Did you see it?
I was so ignorant about the dynamics of it. I didn't totally understand the hype. And then I saw that it was being live streamed on aforementioned Twitter X, and then I clicked on it and I went, why can I even access this? And then the stream was taken down, and then I went, wait, is this actually free? Is this thing free?
If it's free, if you subscribe to Netflix, I think that's their whole point.
And I do, and I clicked, and I went, oh my God, this is actually effectively free. This is a fight I don't have to pay for. I know everybody else knew this. I did not know this. This is just total parent dad mode. What was it, a Friday night? Everybody had gone to bed, and I started watching it. By the time I was watching it, it was bad scene, and it was a Roy Jones Jr. on the commentary, just really driving home that you were watching a stuck bull just get continually stuck, and that there was nothing good, nothing interesting or exciting that was going to happen, which was my expectation. I don't know why anybody would have expected anything differently for a 58-year-old man boxing. Yeah. And I wasn't depressed about it, though. Everybody else was talking about how sad it made them, but I realized that if I'm not paying for a fight, these exorbitant fees they charge us for these hype fights, I'm not so sad. We talk about all these sports as though we're Roman emperors and that they've got some sort of sacred duty to entertain us, right? People would go, oh, this has been a really bad NBA playoffs or a really bad MLB playoffs. This has been a bunch of blowouts, as though these events that are not scripted are supposed to dramatically entertain you no matter what. I just went, okay, well, that's what that thing was. I checked out the curiosity. I rubbernecked at the rec, and it didn't cost me anything. So I don't know. It wasn't really a fight. It was something, though. It was a thing.
Yeah, it was a viral spectacle. And I'm glad you said you didn't know it was on Netflix, because I too had no idea it was on Netflix. You know, like over the course of a week, I'm prepping for Sharp Tech. I'm prepping for Sharp China, tracking geopolitics, recording two GOATs. And so I listened to a podcast from Bill Simmons on Friday, and I was the first time hearing about the Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight. And I didn't listen to the segment about the Jake Paul Mike Tyson fight because, again, I don't care about Jake Paul, and Mike Tyson is 60 years old. But I thought to myself, man, this fight seems like a big deal. I can't imagine paying like $79 for a pay-per-view Mike Tyson Jake Paul fight. But a lot of people are tweeting about it. Bill's potting about it. I guess people are psyched. It makes a lot more sense to me that it was on Netflix. And frankly, when I say I was depressed, it's less about Tyson fighting at 59 years old. It's more about how cynical Netflix is with some of the investments that it makes. Like, this is the most powerful force in entertainment. And I just feel like rather than actually spending money on a fight that people might care about or might be good boxing and like promoting it, really taking the risk, they're just making calculated bets on event programming that's relatively cheaper than like, you know, traditionally prestigious events, but will generate conversation online and maybe convince people to sign up for Netflix, which is smart business. But as a consumer, the playbook is so transparent. Or maybe I'm a more educated consumer because I follow all this stuff, but it's so transparent that I'm like, no, I'm not going to participate in your viral bullshit that, you know, captivates Twitter for 24 hours because I just don't really care.
That's your millennial armor. The Gen Xers were just helpless against the siren song of Mike Tyson.
They were, and I was getting lectured about it from other Gen Xers, and I'm like, look, I know who Mike Tyson is. Like Larry Bird was big in the late 80s too. I said this on Sharp Tech. I don't want to watch Larry Bird play basketball in 2024, but I guess, you know, he captured some hearts in 1988.
But would you watch a YouTuber beat the shit out of Larry Bird in front of the world?
Protect Larry Bird. Let's not do that with Larry Bird.
Holding his bad back. He's just getting smacked.
Yeah, I'm glad that wasn't on Netflix.
Yeah. It's just, why are we beating up Larry Bird? I don't know. It's interesting. It's more interesting than the other things on a Friday night. Yeah, the Gen Xers, Tyson holds a particular sway over them. And you get it when you see highlights, but you and I, we did not live through that. Mike Tyson, for us, was a pop culture figure who was famous in the way of a Larry Bird, and maybe even more so because of the craziness. I remember being a little kid and the ear biting thing happened, but we've got no connection to whatever the mystique of Mike Tyson was. In a way, this Mike Tyson on Netflix, that's actually the Mike Tyson we grew up with. It's just the continuation of spectacle and novelty and, yes, sadness.
Yeah, I think he fought in D.C. in like the late 90s, and it was a big event down at the MCI Center, still probably the only boxing match that has ever been held in that stadium. And, you know, it was depressing then. So, like, again, he's a troubled guy, but also it seems like a pretty interesting guy and seems like his heart is in the right place. So I mean it when I say I'm glad that he got $20 million out of all this. But, you know, and it seemed to work pretty well for Netflix overall. Like, there were obviously streaming issues, but on the whole, it seems like an experiment that they're happy with on the way out of all this.
It was all one big rumination on time and the meaning of time. It was a Richard Linklater film that we all immersed ourselves in, right down to that interview he did with that little girl where he was asked about his legacy, and he talked about how legacy is just another word for ego because we'll all die and we'll all become dust and we're all just passing through. There was something. It was a Mike Tyson experience, that fight was. And are we better for it? Is Netflix better for it? That's the real question. Let's return it to capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I think like from a business perspective and a sports business perspective, I don't know if even Netflix knows precisely what the plan is for live events like this. And what we're seeing right now is Netflix just sort of dipping its toes in the water and experimenting with what some of this event programming might look like and could mean for the business. Are they able to acquire new customers on top of all these properties? I mean, like the Tom Brady roast, the Paul Tyson fight, the NFL games on Christmas Day. Right now, I feel like they're all trial balloons to see whether Netflix wants to go this direction in any real way. Like they're not paying $1 billion a year for the next 11 years to broadcast the in-season tournament. I guess now it's the NBA Cup. Like they didn't do that. Right now, they're seeing whether they want to do more stuff like that. And time will tell.
Who's this sleazy genius behind Netflix who is saying things like, let's try to pay Mike Tyson enough money to get his ass beat in front of all of us? And by the way, Tom Brady, he lost a bunch of money in the whole crypto scam. He's
let's
hard
make him
up.
whole on the way out of the
Tom,
FTX mess.
Let's have a bunch of comedians joke about how you got cucked by a jiu-jitsu instructor and humiliate you because you're so desperate for money. That benefits us. Who's this person dreaming up these schemes?
Well, that's what's frustrating, you know, like as a consumer who watches a lot of prestige television, the Netflix playbook, like in tech, there's a concept called minimum viable product. So basically, if you've got software or hardware that's good enough to bring to the market and you've already invested so much, you just need to get it out there in people's hands, and then you can continue building on top of it and improving the product over time. With Netflix, I think we've seen the inverse of that story, where they launched, it was a really low price point, subsidized by a bunch of venture capital and debt. And for the better part of the last decade, they had like a bunch of great shows. They had great licensed content, and great shows, maybe overstating it, but they were at least like making interesting stuff that was pretty ambitious. And it was entertaining. And in retrospect, I feel like that was sort of the maximum viable product, where it was cheap, it was pretty good, and everybody loved Netflix. Lately, though, they're just so much more cynical about what they produce. Like they can't license as many network shows as they used to. And with the event stuff, they're being really smart and targeted about their spending. But there's not that much ambition. Like I think if they had produced like a documentary for 2 months tracking two boxers, two like Tyson Fury and someone else, that could have been really cool. But it would have been more expensive and also entailed a lot more risk. And Netflix, they're just making smart business decisions, but depressing artistic decisions. And obviously I'm referencing like just an unbelievable library of crap that they've released from on the original programming side over the last 2-3 years or whatever.
Yeah, I find it to be pretty useless for an adult. There's stuff on there that is entertaining for my kids, but there's just there's not a whole lot there for me. There's not a whole lot there in general. And these economic swings, these financial decisions, they can impact the art adversely. I remember years and years ago when that AT&T merger came through with, what was it, Time Warner? I'm trying to even remember how it all went. Whatever impacted HBO. And they basically immediately said, HBO, you just got to start whoring yourself out. I mean, this is ridiculous. You make a few great shows everybody loves. It's not good enough. Look at what Netflix is doing at that time. They make a ton of shows. Just do what you're doing with the A+ content. And I don't know, bro, maybe 100x it. Just make the widget.
Figure it out
100 times over. And the people, I think it led to whoever was there at HBO at that time leaving and quitting, because HBO is just this magical little device where you put in $1 billion in order to make this great TV and you get $2 billion in profit, but it doesn't grow. And there's just this embedded growth principle in business, plus this fear that you're going to be eaten by somebody else. And it's just not good enough. So the art had to be sacrificed.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's unique about Netflix against that streaming landscape is they do have just a tremendous amount of users at this point. And like Netflix has more subscribers in the US than currently subscribe to cable. And so that's why from a sports business perspective, you look at the options on the streaming landscape, and Netflix is a more attractive partner than any of the streaming options. Like I don't personally subscribe to Peacock. They actually have more subscribers than I would think. I mean, I think they've got like 30 million, but Netflix has like 65 million subscribers in the US. And so if you're a sports property, you want to work with Netflix. The question is whether Netflix is willing to commit to any of the like tier one. I don't know what tier we put the NBA in, but some of the more prestigious sports properties.
That's a conversation. I think you would say tier two, but certainly was paid like it was tier two, at least in the rights deal. Is it performing like tier two? Okay, well, I'm going to give you, this is the pop quiz I was going to give you, because this is something the layman asks, and it's hard to recapitulate. And I know it's been a frequent topic on your podcast with Ben. How, if somebody's asking you this question, can the NBA have declined in viewership so much, lost half its viewers, and gained like triple, 3x in terms of what it's getting paid to make the content for ESPN, Amazon, and what have you? Square that circle. It's so paradoxical on its face. What are those dynamics? As you say it, I will run over and grab the cup of coffee that's 20 feet away. I'm still listening to you in the headphones. Go.
Okay. Wireless headphones. Absolutely. Go get your coffee. Well, first of all, when you said you were going to hit me with a pop quiz, I was legitimately a little uncomfortable. I felt like I was back in college or something. But the answer to your question, so I think looking back, the real genius on the NBA's part, or the miracle, I should say, is that they were able to drum up some competition for these bids. And I think that's one of the things that has kept the NFL from being able to extract like trillions of dollars from companies, because the networks that air the NFL love paying for the NFL, but there aren't like people trying to beat down the door to buy NFL rights. It's just sort of the same group of networks. And the NBA managing to convince NBC and then carving out a little package that they were going to sell to some streaming platform, or Warner Brothers Discovery, who I guess has HBO Max, to circle back to the merger. That has allowed them to sort of create a bidding war, and I think get more money for the rights than makes any sense. But, some of the legacy networks, this is really all they have to try to bilk out cable transmission fees for the next 10 years and then figure out what the future of the business looks like. The future of the business doesn't look particularly promising, but everybody's just trying to buy time at this point. And the NBA knew that they had those networks over a barrel, and they were able to capitalize, at least for now. I think it's going to be a much trickier situation when you get 10 years down the road and some of these networks are really going through it, and God only knows what the ratings will look like at that point.
Yeah, I guess it's too far ahead for Silver to really concern himself with, and he has done his job. He has gotten the bag. At the same time, it seems like they're just as insecure about their viewership. I thought everybody would stop caring, but you've got, I'm trying to remember, did Adam Silver blame the election? There was some quote where he blaming
cited the election and the World Series. News for Adam Silver. They do play the World Series every year in late October, but I guess it hit him harder this year.
I mean, who saw that coming? And the election, of course, is every night the election is. I found that I was skeptical of that, but I guess there's been a tremendous drop, certainly in the ESPN side of the viewership. And I've talked about it a bit with Glass-Steagall. It's so odd. I had almost turned that part of my brain off. I was very interested in this as a culture story because the NBA, part of mainstream American culture, that didn't escape us millennials. And if it has half as many people watching it, then that's just a different America that we're living in, pop culture wise. And yet they still made all this money because other things have declined more, relatively speaking, plus the factors that you mentioned. But it continues, and it's uncomfortable for those of us who still want it to be a factor in life, and also those of us who just want to be able to enjoy our teams.
Yep.
What do they do? It just seems like, again, if you were assessing Adam Silver, you would have to say that he has achieved his prerogative, his main prerogative financially. And yet it just seems like the thing he can't do is make the athletes care and try.
Yeah. Well,
I just don't know what to do with that, where he's coming up with some new wacky shenanigan to replace the All-Star game that isn't working because, again, they simply won't show up and try. It's so bizarre to me. I don't know what to make of the entire Silver era. It's like I'm watching somebody. What sort of far-fetched analogy would I even use for this? It's like, okay, this is, you could probably do a better job than me. This is just extemporaneous.
Right.
Somebody's taken over Ferrari and they've announced that they're going to replace all the cars with minivans, and the sales completely plummet, but the stock 100Xs and just continues to 100X. I don't know. I don't know what to say about that CEO. I guess he achieved something.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. A lot of people in the wake of Silver signing the deals earlier this year were saying, well, his legacy is secure. I think Adam Silver's legacy is going to be awfully complicated given what has happened to the NBA on the floor and in mainstream society. And the value of these franchises is in some ways tethered to its cultural relevance. I mean, nobody thinks they're buying an NFL team that's just going to print money off the back of TV deals for eternity. I think a lot of people want in on the NBA because it's cool to own NBA teams, and that is tied to, resonance in the mainstream that may be receding to some degree. But I lied at the top of the show because I knew if I'm talking to you, NBA ratings would come up somewhere along the line. So I wrote down a couple potential explanations. I mean, I think in the ratings conversation, everyone brings their own pet issue to the table when the reality is there are like 8 or 9 headwinds that are driving the NBA to be marginalized. So
the border, inflation. No, wait, that's the other thing. Sorry,
that's what's happening in Queens. Yeah. Back to the crosstabs there. So I will read these for your review. So 1, it's a star-driven league more than a team-driven league, trying to market itself in an era where it's much harder to manufacture new stars that appeal to wide audiences. 2, the focus on transactions and analytics has made it harder to tell the story to regular fans. 3, stars make so much money and have become flat out less likable over the past 10 years. And I also think we've hit a point where every player who goes top 5 is paid $230 million at 23 years old. And that has kind of screwed with the development of some of the most promising young players. 3, this is 4. The schedule is too long and games don't just feel meaningless in the regular season. They objectively are pretty much meaningless week to week. And then 5, this is a pet peeve, but teams wear different jerseys and play on different colored courts every week. And so the league is just actively severing like familiarity and reference points for casual fans. And it drives me insane. And then finally, the actual gameplay is a mess. Like there are too many threes. There are too many reviews. The final 5 minutes of a close game pretty consistently takes about 30 minutes to play out. Like I was watching the end of Nets Hornets last night, and it just took so long. I felt like I was being punished for trying to pay attention to who was going to win this stupid Nets Hornets game. And
as
so
you should have been.
Yeah, I definitely deserve the punishment. I signed up for it. But so I think all of that is in play when you talk about the declining ratings. And if there's one problem, like one unifying problem, it's just that the league doesn't seem to recognize that there's a problem and doesn't seem to be proactive about addressing any one of the, 8 or 9 issues that are currently driving the NBA to the margins of, mainstream conversation. And that's what's frustrating.
Yeah, the league is a little like these players who get hundreds of millions of dollars. If you're going to pay them a tremendous amount of money, then there's going to be less incentive to fix some of these pressing problems. I agree with all of those, including some that people might dismiss as peripheral. I don't know how much the jersey aspect is part of this story, but it's certainly an instance of the league in trying to maximize or optimize some sort of sale. They're looking a little less like signal and looking a little more like noise. It's noisy. When I see jerseys I don't recognize, it's noisy. When I see the Spurs in blue and red playing the Pistons in black and silver,
like, what are we doing?
It's kind of, I don't know. It feels like something that I have to relearn to interface with. That one is more on the margins. The big picture one,
and on the jerseys, the one thing I would add is the league. I forget the exact number, but I feel like they just got $75 billion for this next TV deal. And how much money could the alternate jerseys possibly be driving for these teams? Like, it's such a great example of penny wise and pound foolish. It's like, come on, a little bit of standards across your league and just quality control and brand integrity. Like, have a little bit of pride, have a little bit of dignity, and you can pass on the $5 million that you make from the awful alternate jerseys that still change every year. So even if there are good alternate jerseys, they're going to be gone next year. And the whole thing just strikes me as unbelievably short-sighted.
I would totally agree. It reminds me of Monty Burns saying, "Oh, I might have a lot, but I'd trade it all away for a little more."
Oh my God.
And that is so much of the story with the NBA and maybe the NFL. No, they're talking about having dozens of international games every year. They're trading it away for a little bit more. The aspect of not being able to create stardom in a star-driven league, you just crystallized it. We talked about it a little bit with Nick Wright about how difficult it is to recreate a household name. I hadn't thought about how that is specific and how it might adversely impact the NBA versus some of these other sports, but that makes sense. If it's about the individual, we just don't create individuals like we used to. We don't create those Mike Tysons anymore. That's why we got to drag him out of retirement at age 58. And that just might be this natural phenomenon, large scale, that you can't even blame Adam Silver for. And everybody's saying that it's the league's fault for not putting these small market teams on to showcase Ja Morant or whoever. They're just up against a big social trend that perhaps there's no way around.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I can't necessarily blame Adam Silver because this strategy worked to great effect for the NBA, 30 years ago with Larry Bird and Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan. Like, this is how the NBA found its niche in the mainstream. And the structural forces are just working against the league at this point. It doesn't help that following teams now means following, 8 offseason moves that turn over 60% of the roster every single year. That has severed some of the connection between fans and teams, and made it even more individual centric in this era. And I don't think that's the smartest way for the NBA to try to play it in this new era. But on some level, structural forces change, and that benefits certain businesses and hurts others. And that is probably a good amount of what's happening to the league in the modern era. But they're also not nailing the basics in the midst of all this. And that's where I get frustrated.
Of getting people to try, of getting the games to matter. these things that were once taken for granted now become problems as
and like
the coffers fill.
Yeah, and gameplay, everybody talks about the NFL like it's this really traditionalist sport, but the NFL changes the rules every year and does little tweaks here and there to try to improve it. Baseball, the ultimate traditionalist sport, they change the rules, and I'm not a baseball fan, but everybody who's a baseball fan seems to love the changes that baseball has made over the last couple of years. And the NBA is just sort of sitting on its hands and collecting a ton of money, and a lot of people are tuning out. And that's where it's like, all right, are you guys awake? Like, what's the plan here? I mean, the games are literally harder to watch if you're paying close attention. It's like they want to be background noise.
There's a perverse incentive when it comes to the end of these games that drag on for 30 minutes with replay reviews, which is that if you drag the end of the game broader, then your overall TV rating tends to go up because people watch at the end. And yes, you're making the end boring and you're probably losing some audience share that you would typically get for a fourth quarter. It does probably help the overall average, and perhaps that's one of the reasons they haven't fixed it. But I do see the replay review in general is more driven by the strange, almost like the way a Martian would misunderstand the nuances of our culture that speak to this particular era of the league, where they look at football's success and they go, ooh, I know what makes that popular, that NFL. It's that they stop the game and they do those replay reviews. That makes sense. Let's do replay reviews. That's just, it seems like this is the way the league misunderstands popularity. And I know they've taken some concepts from soccer. They need an NBA Cup because that's like something that happens in soccer that works, I guess. And TBD on that. Maybe that's a hit. Some would argue, yes. I don't know. But there's a lot of that almost taking the wrong things from other sports and slapping them on the NBA edifice that I've noticed.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, I don't want to make it just about Adam Silver because he's not the one making all these decisions, but the Adam Silver regime, I just feel like not many people in the league office have a good feel for what fans love about basketball. And I mean, the fact that it's free flowing and moves pretty quick is why a lot of people liked basketball in the first place. And you compare it to the NFL, this is one where, again, structural forces, structural advantages, the NFL lends itself to a great television product, natural stoppages where, you know, a replay doesn't feel like an assault on the viewing experience. But, you know, you stop for 90 seconds at like multiple times in the final 4 minutes of a game. And at a certain point, basketball fans are just like, what are we doing here? Who gives a shit whether it was a flagrant foul? You know, I don't care if he was in the guy's landing zone as he took a three. Like, why do these rules exist? And do we have to just bastardize the viewing experience in order to, quote unquote, get it right? And half the time they get it wrong anyways. And so I think if there were more people at the league office who just loved basketball on a pure level, they would recognize the error. And this is another one where it may be penny wise, pound foolish, because I'm sure they're able to sell ads on the commercial breaks during some of these reviews. And that's probably part of the story as well. But as a fan, it can be pretty frustrating.
It feels like a story of perverse optimization. How, look, we need to get it perfect, and that's the enemy of good. We need to make sure all these rules are perfectly enforced. And so we're going to pause and we're going to ruin the game flow to do it. We've discovered in our research that people love scoring in threes. Let's make it go crazy, because if they score 300 points a game, we'll make even more money and people will be even more into it. We need to optimize. And actually, no, that's not how it tends to work. There just seems to be a disconnect there. But let's move the conversation to something that a lot of fans are happy about, and that is Turner, Warner Brothers reaching an arrangement, an agreement with ESPN to bring the inside the NBA guys over there. A lot of people like this. They weren't ready to say goodbye to that crew. Charles Barkley, Ernie Johnson, Kenny Smith, Shaq. I wonder, though, is this another indication of stuck culture? Is there an element here where we're going, maybe it was good that it ended and we had that bittersweet, there is still some good years left? How do you feel about it? Are you just excited that they'll be on ESPN, or is part of you going, I don't know. I don't know if we want to pull this into the ESPN era and watch that crew get old?
Yeah, I mean, I am definitely conflicted as somebody who loves Inside the NBA. I feel like over the last 25 years, they've had basically a flawless run and are untouchable. And so I had made peace with the idea that, maybe it is time for things to end. And maybe it's great that they're going to go out at the peak of their powers and we'll all just have this treasured era to look back on. And it's not like Barkley and Kenny Smith were just going to disappear from our lives. Like, they'd still do interviews. I'm sure they would both get huge checks from gambling companies. Shaq would still be in 25 commercials every year. Everyone would be fine. And Shaq is actually one thing that's unappreciated about Shaq. Just like, he was so annoying for the first year or two on Inside the NBA. Like, do you remember any of the Twitter reactions that he generated?
They hated him.
Yeah. And as someone who loved the NBA, I hated him. But he's gotten so much better over time. And I think like the Shaq trajectory on that show is maybe the best testament to the genius down there in Atlanta and everything that they are able to do. So having said all that, after the last several days, like, ESPN came out and said they were going to be working opening week Inside the NBA. That is, they were going to be on Christmas Day. They would be on ESPN through the playoffs and everything else. And I enjoy those guys so much that I sort of fast forwarded in my own head and was like, look, it may be time to just go out on top. But if we get to the next opening night and I have the option of those guys either being in retirement or talking through opening night on ESPN, of course I'm taking the second option. And I do worry that ESPN will screw it up somehow. But I guess you could say these guys are my Mike Tyson. Like, they're just such a core part of me watching basketball that I don't want to leave it behind if we don't have to.
Yeah, I want him back as well. I'm not ready to say goodbye. One of the reasons why I'm not ready to say goodbye is because our culture is stuck. It's not just a matter of boomers refusing to leave the stage. It's also that when the boomers do leave the stage, there tends not to be something good to replace them. And so it's not as though pushing those guys out or having those guys leave, oh my God, I can't wait to, for the ESPN halftime show and what they're going to say there. I don't feel that way at all. So yeah, it's going to be a bit of a strange fit. Yeah, I don't know how it's going to work on a corporate level.
Have you talked to anybody about it? I mean, because ESPN, one of the reasons their shows suck so much is because they give everybody like 20 seconds to talk and then cut to commercial, and they've just loaded up the post-game show, the halftime show with commercials. And so I am curious as to whether Inside the NBA is going to be given like 10 times more freedom on ESPN, because that's been a underappreciated difference between the two formats.
I think they will be given freedom in terms of content latitude. The timing, though, as you're talking about, that I don't know. I would assume content latitude, just based on what we've seen from the freedom they've given Pat McAfee, how the UFC has Trump and all of that, and they're allowed to be whatever they are over there. And so I think there will be freedom. But yeah, those constraints, that's a real thing. I think it's going to be once a week, and they'll work the big events like conference finals and the finals. I believe that they're going to maybe take a day from Scott Van Pelt, which if he's getting paid the same amount of money, hey, I mean, that's probably good by him. I haven't talked to him, but I would imagine if that's the setup, that's how
everybody's happy working less. Yeah. Up to a point anyways.
Yeah. And getting paid the same amount of money. So I think that they can make it work and they can make it fit, but there will be a bit of a a squeeze of finding a way to just get them into the overall content. I mean, it's different though, because so much of the inside thing is the post-game show, and kind of an endless post-game show. And that's just something that you don't tend to see on ESPN. You can't just fill the, mostly useless airwaves of Turner. And that's why ESPN has failed in its studio shows, or one of the reasons. There are multiple reasons, is that they try to do a pregame show for the NBA, and that's not really what's interesting with the NBA. The postgame is really more where it's at. Yeah, I think that ultimately it's going to be entertaining because those guys can't help but be entertaining together. Mm-hmm. But it also might be a little bit awkward, and I'm interested to see that. And the way people wanted to see it, what is it going to look like when Mike Tyson is 58 years old boxing? I want to know, what is it going to look like, good and bad, when these guys leave this quirky cable readout and go to the worldwide leader? Is it all going to fit seamlessly?
I mean, I have no idea what that will be like, because it's like, inside the NBA is at its best when it's 1:30 a.m. and, because you're absolutely right. TNT's alternatives are like reruns of movies from 25 years ago, episodes of The Closer or The Mentalist or something like that. Yeah. Nobody's in a hurry to push Inside the NBA off the stage. And so you get, Charles Barkley, 1 or 2, 3 drinks deep, freestyling on Jussie Smollett, or like the women in San Antonio, like all sorts of third rail shit that I can't imagine watching on ESPN airwaves, which is great.
Has the vibe shifted, by the way? As the vibe shifted that the fat women of San Antonio can now be joked about without it being a big deal? That's the real question before us.
Well, I would say Barkley himself has always sort of been vibe immune. So the people who were mad at him about making fun of the big women of San Antonio, they were always in the minority. And so he was never really under threat. But the vibe shift, I think everybody at this point, he's stuck around for so long that everybody just wants him to be himself. So he's even more immune, even more bulletproof these days.
In the new America, you'll be canceled for not talking about the fat women of San Antonio.
Yeah, exactly. At least on X. Who knows how it'll play on BlueSky?
I'm just imagining Elon Musk deadpanning about all of it and how it's important that we tell the truth about these sorts of things that we have not been honest about. Such as the caloric content of the enormous. I just think it's funny because I have no idea if that city has any sort of bigness issue.
I've never been to San Antonio. I take no position on the women of San Antonio. I just enjoy Charles Barkley at 1:30 a.m. in the midst of the NBA playoffs.
I think it's funny because it's San Antonio, because it's not a city people think about at all. They just think about the Alamo. And the idea that it has this particular problem fueled by Tex-Mex is highly amusing.
Honestly, it makes you want to go. It makes you want to eat the Tex-Mex.
I mean, it's strawberry margarita is a decadent thing, and they got that down there. Queso is a decadent thing as well. When
Queso's dangerous.
That's about all I know of that town. I've been multiple times and still don't have a good sense of it. It's not like I was struck by that particular observation relative to other cities, though. It's not like our country has that issue in multiple places. This is just what happens. A city gets archetypally singled out, fair or not. Boston is the racist city. Philadelphia is the mean fan city.
Yeah.
This is just how it goes. I don't know what DC is. It's
a swampy city. And let me tell you, the stereotypes are absolutely right. And I still love living here, but I don't know. It could get less swampy over the next 4 years. Apparently, a lot of people are looking to make the government more efficient. Cut into some of those consulting contracts. I have no idea what to expect, but I will still be here for 4 years from now. I'm not moving.
It's a new America, man. They might switch back from Commanders to Redskins. You don't know. Anything can happen.
Yeah, I guess so. I guess we're all going to find out together here.
Perhaps we will. Are there any topics we should have covered? Anything you thought I would ask you about that didn't happen in this particular episode? I want to give a takesman his ability to take. I don't want to leave any takes on the table.
No, I mean, I think we're good. So you're not going to be joining BlueSky anytime soon. Is that right?
I mean, in the way Michael Jordan always reserved the right to come back from retirement, exactly like that. It's exactly like that, Andrew. I reserve the right to join BlueSky if it strikes my fancy, but I don't anticipate it happening. I don't want to, part of it is just the aesthetics of the lack of vowels or whatever's going on with those handles. That's a turnoff to me. That's like when they wear the wacky NBA jerseys. I don't much like that. And ultimately, the thing I hate about Twitter is just getting shrieked at by scolds. I don't enjoy that. I like being able to write and express myself in a long way that makes me feel like I said what I need to say. And then my subscribers are my feedback. If they don't like it, then a lot of them are paying customers, and that's their right. I just don't.
Same.
I don't like a lot of the atmosphere already, and a lot of that atmosphere is driven by the very people who are defecting to BlueSky. These people who just have this dying need for you to believe exactly what they believe and are going to talk badly about you among themselves, many of them former coworkers and erstwhile peers. And I just see that replicating over there, only more so. And it's almost like, hey, you know that thing that got you sick? We are developing an even more powerful strain. Do you want it?
Yeah,
I don't. I'm good.
I really don't. I think a big lesson of the last decade is that microblogging is actually not the best way to have nuanced conversations. And so it's funny because you mentioned the feedback from various subscribers. That's been my experience on Greatest of All Talk and with Sharp Tech. It's like we can get critical emails that disagree with us, but they are so much more thoughtful and nuanced and cordial, frankly, than what you see in the microblogging platform, where everybody is just sort of snarky, not really engaging on the merits, no matter what the topic is. And it just is a giant waste of mental energy. So I stand with you on that.
Oh, you've got amazing emailers. The GOAT emailers are just so good. I love hearing from them. And it's weird out there. I mean, I've gotten shit for just titles, because now it's like you can't hit me on what I'm saying on Twitter because I don't tweet. Yeah, but the titles, I remember there's something that crossed the old transom was in the podcast, I think I said the theification of Tucker Carlson. And what we were discussing with Michael Moynihan was how Tucker Carlson had gotten more conspiratorial and was talking about they all the time, and they want this and they want that. It was really more criticism, but I saw that pick up some traction. I think there was an assumption was that I was saying that we had theified him, like I was defending, or I don't even know what. And you're just looking at it. I didn't even know that I could get shit for this. I had no idea. This was a bullet point on the screenshot of the podcast that I put up there because the links are suppressed. So I'm using an image, and now that's an issue. It's a long way of saying I will not be going to BlueSky, Andrew. I don't think that's going to be happening for me.
There you go. Well, neither will I, but I look forward to more great interactions on the House of Strauss podcast. And, I think the podcasting space is great. I think the newsletter space is great. There are sort of respites on the internet. But,
you better be thinking the podcast space is great when you're
clearly
doing 18 podcasts a week.
For the love of God, can this guy stop releasing podcasts?
That would be, I wish your take, that would have been so interesting if you came here and you said podcasting's dead, it's counterproductive, and frankly, I hate it. I think it's a net negative.
I've been a tech skeptic for my entire life, and dating back to 2012, the golden era of Twitter, I was in a car with David Jacoby back at Grantland, and he was pitching me on hosting a podcast. And I told him, I think podcasts are stupid and what a waste of time. I don't know why anybody does that. But eventually he won out. And I would say that my personal history has proven Dave Jacoby right. So shout out to Jacoby, wherever he is.
Well, I'm going to pitch you on exactly what you need, which is another podcast that you host.
Oh, boy.
Just similar to the way that Stratechery is a portmanteau combining strategy and tech. Your podcast could be Tactic, the tech skeptic, where Ben brings up an emergent technology and you just dump on it.
Explain why it's going to fail.
And just say it will never work. That's my idea for you that I'm leaving you
Perfect.
with.
Well, I'll float that for him in 2025, and maybe the Vibe Shift will request Tactic. Yeah. What was the name? The portmanteau?
It was Tactic. I'm not saying it's the best. It's the first one that came to mind. It was the extemporaneous. We'll workshop Tactic. Give us your outro. Give us your plugs of your many podcasts that we should find you on.
Well, you can subscribe to Greatest of All Talk individually, and I promise we are not as negative on the NBA as I may have come across in the NBA portion of this podcast.
I've had a lot of fun.
Negative. No, I'm not. I've had a lot of fun watching League Pass. That's part of what makes some of the details so frustrating. Because over the last month, I'm watching basketball every night, and it's been pretty much wonderful as far as I'm concerned in terms of my quality of life improvement. But Greatest of All Talk as an individual subscription, you can also get access to Greatest of All Talk by subscribing to Stratechery, where Ben, in addition to being a really good analyst of tech, is also just a really good writer and makes me think with his daily updates every day. So you get that plus access to Sharp Tech and Sharp China. And there's a lot of value. And also Dithering is a 15-minute tech podcast that Ben does twice a week. That is one of my favorite listens on a regular basis. So those are my plugs. I'm a good podcast host, but an uncomfortable plugger. I really lean on Ben Golliver as the greatest plugger of all time for Greatest of All Talk. But other than that, I don't know. I think it's been a good, solid hour here, and we should go out on top like Inside the NBA isn't going to do.
Oh, well, I aspire to solid. I will co-sign it. If you are slackening in the plugging, then I will say those are all great products. I can't recommend them highly enough. Thanks so much for stopping by, Andrew.
It's great to see you as always.